Jack Kirby was fascinated by the idea of gods, and he kept creating comic series about pantheons. The Mighty Thor at Marvel, the New Gods at DC, then back to Marvel where he created the Eternals. This week, Emmet and I begin a look at the Eternals, discussing the first 4 issues. I saw the MCU movie, but it wasn't until I read the first page of issue 1 that I really got what the concept was. Stay tuned. As always, a reminder that you can support the podcast by pledging a few bucks a month at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or if you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. This is Tim.
And this is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Emmet is in country Victoria, Australia, and with the kangaroos. How you doing?
I'm well, Tim. I'm well. How are things?
I'm fine. So we're back with Jack Kirby stuff, and we're starting with the Eternals, the first 4 issues. Now, of course, the listener might be thinking in terms of the MCU movie by the same title, and as I think you liked it less than I did. Not that I liked it, but...
I didn't particularly like it, and I was thinking about us maybe doing a run-through of it once we finish this, just to contrast with how they chose to depict the Eternals and how Jack Kirby presented them.
I thought about watching it for this, and it's so long, and I just didn't feel like it.
Yeah, no, it would have to be, I think, to justify the amount of time, it would have to be a dedicated episode we'd do it for. That's why I wanted to run it by you, so I'm glad you brought it up. But it's not something I would willingly choose to do myself. If I could be any more clear.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection of the movie was, it was just kind of meh to me. I mean, they're a cast of dozens, and they all had speaking roles. There's just too many people. And even though I could tell the movie was trying to sort of stagger the appearances of the various Eternals and killing some off and then introducing more, it was still just so many. And I noticed doing a little research that Kirby introduced the Eternals over the course of the series. Gilgamesh, for example, didn't show up till issue 13, and it kind of seemed like the film would have been better if they just introduced some of the Eternals, and then maybe there'd be more chance of getting a second movie where they could introduce more of them. But it's like, here are all the Eternals.
Yeah.
Now remember all their names and powers and get to know them. No.
Instead, the movie had the sequel bait of, and here's these other Eternals, and they're going into space. And maybe Harry Styles will be there too. Who knows? Who could say?
I don't know. I mean, I was looking at the list of like planned MCU movies, and there used to be a second Eternals film on there, and there isn't anymore. So
and for that, we can all give thanks.
And so we have the Deviants and Crow starting in the first issue, and I was like, was Crow in the movie? And I looked into it like, oh, that was Crow?
It was, yeah. He had less personality.
Yeah, like almost no resemblance to Crow.
And, you know, played by a very interesting actor, like a very interesting performer. And then that's just what they had him do, was just be this menacing figure. It was ridiculous.
Anyway, so I don't think that I really got what the Eternals was from watching the movie. And then I pick up this, and the first page of issue 1, I say, oh, this is Chariots of the Gods. And I've never even read it, but I was familiar with the idea of it, and it figures that Kirby would be into that because he was so into doing comics about various gods.
Oh, yes, yes.
Thor and the New Gods and
what
forth.
Did you think when you got to page 2? Did you think, oh, Emmett's going to play that game again? And it's going to have that game where he accuses somebody of ripping off Jack Kirby. And is probably wrong.
What does this remind you of?
Okay, well, folks listening, the comic opens. You got this incredible cover. You've got the first page, which, as Tim says, establishes immediately the concept of the Eternals, charity of the gods. This idea of ancient civilizations were influenced by alien visitors. Okay, it's an established idea. It's sort of one of the main criticisms that I've read about the Eternals is that Kirby's maybe a little too loose with the race stuff, which is certainly also a factor of Chariots of the Gods, because the basic premise is these primitive peoples couldn't possibly have built the pyramids. You know, they needed help, right? So there is something to be said for that. But we turn to the second page, and it's a splash page, and there's this what looks like a vessel of some kind. It looks like it has a window, and there's a driver, and he's seated within it, and he has a tube coming out of his mouth. And Tim, this is Ridley Scott's Alien.
Okay.
This is exactly what we see in the first Alien movie when John Hurt visits the world where he finds the egg and he gets infested, but they encounter a giant, a seat with a skeletal figure inside. He's got a tube coming out of his mouth. He even has slightly Aztec-looking designs. H.R. Geiger did the art design for Alien. And for years, that figure was called the Space Jockey, I believe.
No.
And years later, Ridley Scott made a movie called Prometheus where he explained what that was all about, and it was bad. But I have to be convinced otherwise. I would have to be convinced that this is not a direct influence on Alien. Because it's the staging of it, the look of it, even the shot of it, it's the same. I will attempt to find you an image reference so you can see for yourself.
Okay. Yeah, so this first issue really throws a lot of background information at you. Like, you got to study up on this world and everything, and there's just a lot to remember in this first issue. There's not so much action as just here's information. Yes, there's a lot of stuff being sort of flung at the reader, and it's interesting as well because you also have the appeal to authority that these comics usually have, which is the idea of the academic who's also there to explain what's going on, and to his subordinate, in this case his daughter. But that's a really common trope as well. You keep seeing that in old comics too. But the idea of this lunk who's along with them on the adventure actually secretly having knowledge of what's going on, that's a slightly new twist on some of what we've seen before. Right. So it's Dr. Damien with his daughter Margot and an assistant known as Ike Harris.
Ugh.
And they've discovered the Inca's Chamber of the Gods with this huge stone carving of their space god in a spaceship. And Ike starts talking like Earth has other intelligent beings besides humans, and the Damians are like, what are you talking about? And then Ike is looking for something in the chamber, the object that will call the gods back to Earth. So yeah, there's this beacon, as they call it later, that's calling the gods back. I mean, apparently the gods have visited occasionally to see what was going on. I guess, well, it's all described in this first issue that the gods first came when there were just apes on Earth, and they did some kind of surgery and created like humans and deviants and Eternals.
It's kind of an iteration on his 2001 stuff, in effect. you know, that which also was heavily reflective of Chariots of the Gods, but the idea of like this advanced society coming down to Earth and, you know, sending the human species off in a new direction, like interfering with our evolution in effect. But yeah, the addendum that Kirby introduces, which is the one that people sort of raise their eyebrows at, is the idea of a sort of well, it's very biblical. You see, I think it's very sort of related to the idea of the biblical idea of the Nephilim, you know, where you have like these sort of angelic beings that are sort of, like on Earth, they're human derived, they're the offspring of humans and angels, and then you've got humans, and then you've got devils. And that's kind of what we're seeing here with the Eternals and with Homo sapiens and with the Deviants. And that is it's something that's been sort of interrogated by fans ever since. Is this racist? You know, because you're basically saying that there is a good race, an okay race, which is humans, and a bad race, which is the Deviants. And I see the criticism, and it's worth, you know, reflecting on it. But what I found interesting about reading this for the first time, in contrast to some extent to the movie, because I think the movie tries to introduce complexity but does it in a sort of half-assed way. The Deviants actually have personhood. Like, their whole motivation is, we know the gods are coming to kill us. So,
right. Yeah, they're trying to prevent the gods from coming back.
Yeah, so we've been in this state of preparedness for an invasion for centuries, if not millennia. We know this is coming. So we're going to assume that anybody allied with the gods is going to kill us. That actually it makes some sense. You kind of see their point of view, which they are staring down the barrel of an extinction event. Whereas humans could potentially talk the way out of it, which is what we observe in the next few issues. And Eternals are like God's chosen. They're going to be fine. So there is an interesting angle here, even from the beginning with Kirby. I think the Deviants have basically saying the Deviants aren't orcs. Like Lord of the Rings, the issue with the orcs was, well, are they all essentially evil? And Tolkien sort of struggled with that, where he was saying, well, maybe they made a choice. Maybe they have, you know, every soul has the opportunity to make a choice. He started fixating on the religious idea of it. And I think there's something similar happening here. The Deviants are more or less a society that's constantly under threat. And this is the result. This is what you get when you get that situation.
Right. So our first introduction to them is when they knock this plane out of the sky because they're afraid that it's that it's coming for them, or
yeah. Look, having just said all that, this pilot successfully ejects from the plane, and then they immediately vaporize him. Look, it's not a good look. I'm not defending them. They killed a pilot, you know. Yeah. Straight away, that's how they're introduced. But it's interesting just to think on what Kirby's trying to say with this idea. And is he saying that they are essentially evil, or is he saying that no, this is what you get when you have a literally threat of extinction being held over an entire people? Something, I don't know, worth thinking on.
Yeah, well, if anybody worried that they're going to be wiped out would be defensive, I guess.
That's it.
And we meet Crow for the first time, and he's talking about getting to the beacon first to stop it from calling the gods. And the Deviants live under the sea in these sunken ruins of the city of Lemuria. It's mentioned, explained later that there were a number of these island cities that were destroyed by the gods at one time when they returned.
Yes. So Atlantis and Lemuria and all these like hyper advanced cities were actually deviant cities, and the implication is that they spread too far and too fast. They became very advanced, and they sort of created this very advanced, technologically advanced civilization on Earth, and the gods don't want that. You stay in your lane, basically. No, you don't get to develop that quickly. So really, that seems to be the issue with them, is that they're too populous and they are too ambitious, and the gods are going to keep culling them. So again, it's a little more interesting than Deviant's Bad, which I think some writers that have followed on in relation to the Deviants and the Eternals have just leaned into, oh yeah, they're just evil.
Yeah, the super simplified version.
Yep.
So we go back to the Inca God Chamber, and of course it turns out that Ike Harris is Icarus.
Yeah. And I'm curious about this as well. Like Icarus, I mean, we'll get to it, I'm sure, but why choose Icarus as your introductory character, your point of view character for the Eternals? I think Icarus, who's famously associated with hubris as well. Like I kept thinking the word hubris as I was talking about the Deviants there, and like why they're being put down. But that's Icarus's sin too. It's that he got too far. He flew too high to the sun. Literally flew too high to the sun.
Too close to the sun. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for the correction. And I think that sort of seems on theme with the Deviants as well. That they overexpanded, and the gods want things just so, and that's the crux of the entire Eternals comic book. Really, it's that you have waves of cults happening down through the millennia, potentially with the destruction of the Earth itself entirely if it's found wanting. Which is in a sort of not that's exactly what this entire comic's about.
It's kind of like how humans treat wildlife.
Yes.
And the Celestials, the gods, being ostensibly so far above everybody else, you can kind of imagine them having the same attitude.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and this is where it gets into the operating on the prehistoric apes and producing these three different kind of races. And Icarus can see that the gods are indeed coming. They've heard the beacon and they're on their way. And the Deviants are all upset about that, of course. They arrive in this Inca God Chamber. Let me actually look at the comics pages here instead of just my notes. Right, and they're shooting at everybody, and there's a big and I I like this shroud gun, just kind of shoots a blanket at Icarus and wraps him up in this blanket so he's distracted.
If it works, it works.
Yeah, then they want to destroy the beacon, but then the gods arrive. And that's the end of the first issue, as the gods are arriving there.
Yeah, it's funny, as I was going through the pages, I was reminded of, I think it's a really early issue of Alpha Flight, where there is a John Byrne created villain who's a prehistoric man who also encounters an alien craft and then gets surgically experimented on and turned into, I think he calls himself the Master of the World. I could be wrong.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, and the single page of the surgery event that sort of hyper evolved him, very similar to that one panel from this page. That's two. Comic, that's two people I'm accusing in one episode, Tim. Ridley Scott and John Byrne come out. But no, that single page in Alpha Flight that he did, I read that as a kid, and it terrified me. It was so it was so disturbing, and the powerlessness of this character and everything. It was just frightening. And anyway, I think Kirby sort of just has this lone panel of an unconscious ape man being cut into, it looks like, and he's got all these wires attached to him, and and his brain's exposed, I think, and it's horrifying.
So the cover of the second issue actually names Chariots of the Gods. More fantastic than Chariots of the Gods.
Hey, lean into it.
This is it, the coming of the Celestials. Yeah. Yeah, in case you didn't quite grasp it in the first issue, Yes,
Yeah.
Chariots of the Gods. You know, that's
And-
that
and-
book.
What's more upsetting, top left corner of the comic, still only 25 cents. Oh, my soul left my body.
Yeah, nowadays it would be still only $5.
Yeah.
The first page of the second issue, I had to look at it for a while to figure out what's happening. It's the shadow of the god's ship, but then there are these markings on the ground. It's, I guess, kind of like, well, what you see, and I guess maybe it is the Incas, right? Those.
Isn't that actually in South America? Isn't there
Right.
that?
right?
Yeah, the conspiracy theorists think it is actually an alien spacecraft landing strip.
Yes. I guess that's what Kirby's going for here. But I was having trouble. Is this a shadow or is this a hole in the ground? But yeah, I guess it looks kind of 3D somehow.
Yeah, so it's the shadow overhead, the silhouette of this vessel, and I looked up what I'm thinking of. It's the Nazca lines in
okay.
southern Peru. But yes, again, I think it's this cultural understanding of hieroglyphic art, where the artists actually were able to consider the perspective of something above them. You see it in Indigenous Australian art as well, this idea of a perspective from above the earth looking down, and the artists were able to put themselves in that point of view and depict art from a sort of over perspective, because they weren't as individually focused as we are in some of our cultural artistic practice.
Even though they couldn't get up high enough to actually see it.
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't there that idea that Einstein was so good at math he figured out black holes because of the math? So it's the same sort of abstract thought is capable of this, but we tend to understand everything from a singular individual point of view, and that's where we maybe lose that context. We lose that ability to abstract ourselves to another point of view, and I think that's where these artistic practices come from. Of course, we in the 20th century look at the Nazca lines and go, "Oh well, aliens couldn't possibly be human invention, human creativity or imagination couldn't possibly be that." But yeah, Jack Kirby agrees, aliens.
Yeah. So ever since fairly early in the Kirby DC stuff, we've been seeing these spreads on pages 2 and 3. And in this series, I finally kind of put my finger on something about it, that having a panel that big gives you a lot more elbow room to show relative size. And like in this one, issue 2, we've got this huge spaceship and the tiny people on the ground. And the other issues that we're talking about here are similar. These something huge and something tiny, and in a normal size panel, even if it's a whole one page, you can't show that much size contrast. And it really accentuates the bigness of something, and like it almost pops out of the page.
Yeah, I think when I read these issues before we started recording, I was really worried about how this conversation was going to go. Because Tim, that was literally the only thing I could think about to talk about. That was the only thing I could think about. It was just what was most notable to me about the Eternals was this idea of bigness, how Kirby had actually nailed this idea of the vastness of the Celestials and how huge they are and the gargantuanness of them and how small we are in contrast. And I thought, what a great realization of this idea that he's been coming back to. But I think he nailed it here, and it was the only thing I could think to talk about. And we are now half an hour in, thereabouts, and I've been talking a lot. So,
okay, so we talked about that. See you next week. No, okay.
Yeah, okay, bye.
And, of course, Crow is all upset because now they're here. We lost, he says. Now, the gods are shooting at him and shooting at everybody. And Icarus doesn't get why they're so PO'd.
Yeah. Turning to the gods is to invite destruction, but like they're coming for him anyway. Like his inability to consider their point of view is pretty bad.
So in the God Chamber, the rocks are falling, and the deviants escape. There's this like water pool there that goes down into the sea, and they get in their ship and just go down into it and out. And yeah, it's mentioned here several times that there was an eternal that the Incas called Tecumseh.
Mm-hmm.
Hadn't tried saying it out loud before. Tecumseh, and they keep mentioning that he was there with the Incas, but he vanished. And Crow thinks that that's the god's fault, and you could disappear too. He's saying to Icarus. Oh, and then Kirby keeps tying the Eternals into other legends of the past, like that when the gods returned, they fought in another time they fought the deviants with a powerful weapon, destroyed the deviant cities, and led to a huge flood. And then that was the same flood as Noah and Noah's Ark, and Icarus led the Ark to the mountain it landed on, but they probably mistook him for a bird.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Yeah, the bird. I love that they see him, that he's remembered as a bird. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what the Bible says, a dove, I think.
I was trying to look that up. I believe it was a dove, because I thought it was the dove flew back with a plant so they could see there was land nearby. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds right. Icarus, they're still in the God Chamber, and he opens what's called a resurrection crypt, which seems like kind of a contradiction in terms, but it contains the atoms of men from the Inca past, and the atoms reform into the still living guys who were kept there for the return of the gods. Mm-hmm. And one of them is Ajax, who the Incas called Tecumseh. It's the same guy. And so he and Icarus know each other. I mean, I guess if you're an Eternal, it means you know all the other Eternals.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, oh, you're German. Do you know Fritz? You must know all the other Germans. And so the reconstituted men open up the Inca version of a flight control room. They're said to be the ground crew for the gods. I think it's the professor who says that. And the ground crew puts down this pylon, and from the ship comes Erishem, leader of the fourth host, and he stands on the pylon. And he's supposed to stand there for 50 years and then decide if Earth will live or die. So I was thinking, so is the story going to take 50 years then?
Potentially, yeah. I think there's been a number of stories in recent years, but also ever since this series, where it's, the Celestials are back and they're going to judge us for real this time. Or don't wake up this sleeping Celestial, otherwise he'll judge us. So it's how do you actually make something which experiences time at a geologic pace immediately threatening to people? Because that's what comic books need to introduce. They need to introduce the imminent threat. But it's like, well, no. I mean, this civilization could rise and fall, and then Arashim will... Actually, I've had a thought. Oh, wait, they're all dead.
Yeah, I was reading this, and I was thinking... I mean, it's within the Marvel Universe. And I was like, it's kind of a problem with a shared universe. If you do a story that's this big... and it has no ramifications in any of the other books.
Well, that's what's happened with the movies.
Yes,
that's what's
indeed.
happened with the movies, because like the Celestial that was birthed has a giant fist sticking out of one of the poles, and nobody's talking about that. That's not even a tourist destination.
Well, and I think there are numerous examples of, there was this big threat, why didn't you call the Avengers?
Yes.
Well, and then like the Secret Invasion series, they didn't even call any superheroes. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I guess it's budgetary problems. So
that was bad all around. Didn't want to pay artists. We hired an AI algorithm to generate our theme credits sequence. Oh, great.
But yeah, you have to have just kind of suspend disbelief. Like, okay, well, even though this is happening, the Avengers don't know anything about it. Fantastic Four, nope. It's not affecting them at all.
Yep.
Not that I don't think this book ever crossed over with other books, but I imagine at some point they've introduced other Marvel characters into.
It does, yeah. Like the Hulk turns up and stuff like that, or is it the Hulk? That's the whole thing. But notably, that is when Kirby is sort of either leaving the book or has left the book.
Right.
That's when the sort of shared continuity starts entering into it more. He's very much trying to play in his own little patch here. And
yeah, that's what I kind of figured. I mean, we saw in the DC stuff. I mean, there's one or two Superman appearances, and that was and I think there was a Batman in the Demon because they were in Gotham City. But yeah, very little crossover with other DC characters.
He just wants to tell his stories,
Now, of course, most of the stuff that he does when he returns to Marvel is Marvel characters that he created in the 60s, or previously, Captain America, Black Panther. But even then, I think they don't really cross over much with any other characters. They still become kind of self-contained.
Yeah.
I guess you don't hire Kirby to do crossover with other books by other writers.
Yeah, it's so strange because the shared continuity does lead to these discussions. Which is, why didn't the X-Men help out? Why didn't the Fantastic Four help out? And it's not even that. The fact that they're all located pretty close to one another in New York City as well, like they're all in the same. There's practically like street divides between certain characters.
You go from X-Men Street to Fantastic Four Street.
Yeah. It's a bit, if you're going to have this shared continuity, you need to have a bigger world. And say what you will about Marvel, whenever Kirby sort of introduced these like big swings, he tends to expand the horizon of the field of play. Like he's dealing in sort of cosmic level threats and or ancient civilizations impacting on present day time, things like that. And some of the Cosmic Era Marvel creators sort of followed his lead and started going into more, let's find out what's happening in the Kree homeworld. Let's find out what's happening in the Skrull homeworld. Let's make this a little more varied. Then they're all going to rock up in Greenwich Village and start punching each other in the street.
More on the Eternals coming up. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support.
Hey, I'm Jen.
And I'm Sean. We're here to tell you about our podcast, Worst Collection Ever.
And this is the show where we tell you about the worst comic book collection in existence. And it just happens to belong to us.
We have some of the worst comics from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They're bad. They're not worth anything.
No good.
Why do we own them? I own a number of issues of Terror Inc. and Guy Gardner.
Basically, we go around to local comic book stores and we buy everything we can out of dollar boxes.
We tell you about the weird stuff in them. We tell you about stuff that's related to them. We go into tangents. And we're very uninformed, so...
Oh my god, totally. But totally check out our podcast because you'll hear us just talk and joke about Marvel books and DC books from God only knows when.
That's right. It's our show, Worst Collection Ever, every Tuesday on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you get your podcasts. Download, rate, subscribe, tell a friend.
It'll be good and terrible, but good.
so issue 3, the cover, we finally see Icarus in his basically superhero costume.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure I've seen elsewhere, but I'd never quite stuck these things together in my mind. Okay, that's an Eternals costume. Okay. In this issue, Ajax frames the whole thing as the Celestials planted intelligent life on this planet. The crop has matured. The Celestials will test it and weigh its value. So it's not even wildlife, it's plants.
Yeah. Or, the idea of introducing invasive species to a landscape just to see what happens, which, living in Australia is something that the Australians are very conscious of, that the Europeans came here, didn't give a toss about the native wildlife, and just introduced all these creatures that then did a number on the flora and fauna.
I think didn't rabbits get introduced that way?
Huge issues with rabbits, cats as well. Cats are a big problem. And there was even the stories of, in New Zealand, there were all these native birds that were land-dwelling birds, because they didn't have to evolve to fly. They got wiped out pretty quickly. And that's why the kiwi is one of the few that still survives. It's one of the last of them. There's all these other varieties of land-dwelling birds that just got slaughtered when rats and so forth came over in the boats.
Yeah. Well, in fact, this is off topic, but I think in Guam, the birds there, I heard, were wiped out by snakes that hitched rides on boats and got there and just ate all the birds.
Yeah, because it's like, again, you've completely altered through this random introduction of a creature. The native creatures have no protection. They don't know what this is. They don't know what to do about it.
Yeah. So the Celestials are going to seal off this Inca God chamber area for 50 years. And the Damians are upset because they want to research what's there, and they don't have much time to decide if they're in or out, like just a few minutes. And Dr. Damien says he just has to stay because this is what he's lived for, to do this kind of research. But he tells Margot she can't sacrifice her youth for his dreams and she should go. And she doesn't want to. And then Icarus gets a little too forceful here. I don't think this would play today.
It does, yeah. It's not great. It's not good.
Because he just drags her away. He says, your father has made his choice, but you've hesitated too long. I'm deciding for you. We're leaving. And he carries her out, puts her in the plane, and zaps her with his eye beams to knock her out so she can't fight him anymore.
There's a Tom Cruise, Charlize Theron movie. Not Charlize Theron, I'm sorry. That Cameron Diaz movie from a couple of years ago. I think it's called Night and Day. And the joke is that Tom Cruise is this super spy type character, and she's just this ordinary person he meets, and he keeps knocking her unconscious. Like, he keeps doing it. Happens multiple times in the movie.
Wow.
And that was, I want to say, like 15 years ago, maybe, just about that. Even at the time, people were saying, that's weird, my dude. And it's a movie which nobody talks about because I don't think he did particularly well, but I remember it, and I remember just the brief discussion when people were talking about it was, this is a creepy kind of movie. Tom Cruise keeps knocking Cameron Diaz out.
Wow. I don't think I've ever even heard of it, but
it's played for laughs. It's so funny. There was a recent movie called Argyle, which also has a main character being knocked unconscious repeatedly. And I think it's not self-aware enough to actually comment on that. It simply is presented. But there's so many other problems in that movie, nobody's mentioned that problem. It's a terrible movie, Tim. It's a terrible movie.
Anyway, so now Icarus is flying this plane with Margot in it. And meanwhile, Crow is in trouble with the other deviants because he failed to keep the gods from returning. But he figures he can scare humans into fighting the gods by masquerading as the devil. And actually, later it's revealed that the deviants are the source of the devil myth to begin with. The idea of Satan, I guess, comes from the existence of the deviants.
Yeah, and they basically enslaved humans in prehistoric times. So, like, they are associated with, the Lord Satan, hell. You can see all of these things emerging from the deviants having actually enslaved ancient humans and used them as chattel.
Yeah. And Crow causes horns to appear on his own head. He can shape his body, I guess. So that would be useful, I guess, to be able to change your shape like that. But
his comment is amazing. This image lingers like a virus in their brains.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah. Take that, Richard Dawkins. Jack Kirby invented memes. What's the year of publication? When does the Selfish Gene come out? Selfish Gene is where you define memes. 1 second.
Okay, yeah, this is 1976 that we're reading here.
Hey, here we go. What year was the Selfish Gene? 1976. Same year. Same year. I'm giving it to Jack, though. The idea of the notion of an idea being a virus, something that actually travels through time. That is the original definition of meme. That's what a meme was, according to Dawkins. This idea of a cultural transmission of ideas, like DNA, but what if it was actual concepts of culture? That's a meme. And here you have our deviant friend saying this image, and he's got his horns out. He's looking menacing. This image lingers like a virus in their brains. This is such a beautiful sentence. I really like it.
So then Icarus drops the illusion of wearing normal human clothes, and then now Margot can see the blue costume on him. And he jumps out of the plane and is flying around outside, and Margot's all freaked out by that. It just looks dangerous to her. While she's hanging her head out the door of the plane, that looks dangerous.
Do you think Icarus felt a bit hurt when they explored the Incan tomb and he found out his old mate Ajax was referred to them as the Lord of Flight, when flying is basically his thing?
Maybe.
Yeah, like, that's my thing. I'm the flyer.
But he's flying around, and then this deviant ship appears. The deviant ship is really cool, actually. It looks vaguely like the Batmobile, like the 66 Batmobile, but it's all red. But yeah, it has kind of bat-like or maybe devil-like sharp points on it.
Horns, yeah. Which, again, is something we remember from his New Gods work, you know, or something's evil, it's got horns. Even a planet can be evil with horns.
Right.
I will never let that go. I will never let that go. It's just incredible. Transylvania, wasn't it? Or something like that. But I'm also thinking of the Forever People's flying car as well. That's similar design too, but like less horned.
Right. So, but Icarus manages to get back in the plane, and it causes it to vanish just as the deviants are going to shoot at it. And the plane somehow is encapsulated in something else that makes it move much more quickly than a plane would. And they quickly go to New York. Because that's where Marvel superheroes go, is New York. So,
New York.
Yeah, you got to.
Not going to go to Montreal.
She was like, "Well, I have a house in Colorado. Nope, we're going to New York. But we won't run into Spider-Man or anybody. We're just going to New York."
Do you know what would be cool? It would be cool if all the superheroes franchised their personalities, their personas rather, sorry. So you could have a Chicago Spider-Man and an LA Spider-Man and a Toronto Spider-Man and a Buenos Aires Spider-Man. And you know, if you could just have local chapters of all the different Marvel heroes in different cities, which I guess is what Grant Morrison tried to do with Batman Inc. But like, yeah, this is maybe a way of making it a little more interesting because everyone's just in New York all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it happened because that's where Marvel was based. But yeah, it ends up being kind of odd. I mean, it's not quite so New York based nowadays, but still, it's pretty New York based.
You wouldn't want to live there.
No. Well, in fact, Icarus says to a cabbie after he and Margot get out, he says, "Thanks, cabbie. Keep the change. I enjoyed your sense of humor." And the cabbie says, "We need one here, buddy."
Brilliant.
And so they go up in this apartment building, Margot and Icarus, to Circe's apartment. Mm-hmm. And so we meet our third Eternal. And he wants Margot to hang out at Circe's place to be safe while he has to go out and take care of other stuff. But now the deviants are attacking New York. And you can see like big blocks of buildings are on fire on the last page. And Crow is walking around with his horns and people are freaking out. It's the devil himself. The devil is real.
I never believed he existed until now. I do love his lines. "I've returned from space to reclaim this domain." The devil is in space. It's brilliant.
And so that's the end of the third issue. The fourth issue cover says "Night of the Demons," and we see, indeed, demons crawling and flying all around, and Circe and Margot looking out the window, and Icarus in the background hanging from a demon's claws, and flames.
You know what else we see? We see that the price of this comic is now 30 cents, so it's gone up 5 cents.
Well, yeah, those still only flashes were always like indicators that it wasn't going to stay that way much longer.
Oh dear. Yeah, 30-cent comic.
In fact, my brother and I were talking the other day, and we were thinking about some of the first issues of Amazing Spider-Man that we bought in the late 70s, and trying to recall, like, when did the price go up? And we were looking at covers, and it seems that, well, he said he had heard that they would test out price hikes just in certain areas first. So there appear to be some issues that have different prices on different versions of the cover. And like what we bought in Iowa was 35 cents, but what was sold someplace else might have been 40 cents.
That's weird.
Which is, yeah, kind of odd. But anyway, so, okay, Night of the Demons. And yeah, the city's on fire. I don't know how the city can recover from this. Because, I mean, you see every page, it's just fire everywhere. And no other superheroes there. No Spider-Man, no Iron Man.
And that's why we needed Dwayne McDuffie to invent damage control and explain that whenever there's a superhero battle, these are the people who fix it up afterwards. Which is a great premise for a book. One of the best premises for a comic book they ever came up with.
So we start out with Icarus fighting deviants, and then they shoot this gun that sticks a brain mine to his forehead, and it knocks him out. And so they carry him off. And meanwhile, it's just flame and demons everywhere, and people are freaking out. And the funniest thing to me was we go back to Circe's apartment, and they're watching the coverage on TV, and the reporter says, "There's no cause for alarm, folks," as we see just flames everywhere in the background.
It's a bit too real, Tim. It's a bit too real for me.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here, folks. Don't worry about it. I'm kind of worried about it.
Brooklyn's not on fire, just Manhattan. So just don't worry about it. And so Cersei and Margot are talking, and of course Margot's worried about Icarus, but as has been stated multiple times, Eternals can't die, so don't worry about him. And then it comes out that Cersei is the Cersei who appeared in Ulysses, and because she's talking about meeting Ulysses and his crew and turning them into pigs, and Margot's like, "Oh, that's Cersei." And Cersei says, those Greek writers never could spell my name right. Because she's spelling it Sersi in the story rather than Circe.
Yeah. But she's also a figure from Arthurian myth as well. I want to say, was it Nynaeve or something like that? There was because we sort of conflate Morgana with other figures from Arthurian myth. We tend to see Morgana as a witch now, but there was other women characters in the Arthurian myth that were associates of Merlin's. So I'm trying to remember the name of her, but I think that's who this is supposed to be here. Again, Kirby's Nimue. Is it Nimue? Nimue.
Okay.
And I think that is who that's supposed to be.
All right, yeah, we have a panel of Merlin watching Cersei pull some kind of a creature out of a canister, and he says, "This can only be witchery," and she says, "Don't be jealous, old soak."
Yeah. I think Nimue might not be the correct character because apparently they now consider her to be Merlin's daughter, so that wouldn't make sense. But somebody in that sort of canon, I think, is what being depicted here. I do love how Kirby will just draw on like Arthurian myth and Greek myth and Norse myth and then he'll turn around and go, but they're aliens. Okay, Jack, thanks.
So then some demons appear at the window, and they're coming in, and they've got this gun called a flamer that shoots flame at Cersei and Margot, but Cersei is able to divide the flame so that it goes on either side of her and Margot. And then Cersei turns the deviants into lizards.
That's her move. That's what she does.
And Cersei has this mirror she says is kind of a communication device. It reacts to thought waves. And there's a panel where you see these kind of clouds in the mirror's surface. And then in the next panel, you can see it's showing the city of the Eternals. And Cersei wants to contact her friends there.
I find these two panels very interesting because they remind me a lot of a 1950s fantasy movie where you would have a magic mirror. I've seen this in a couple of different movies, awful movies I've watched through Mystery Science Theater 3000. But how they would depict the use of the magic mirror is they would have like smoke sort of roiling against the pane, and then it would reveal the scene that they're sort of being directed to. So I feel like this is a very filmic depiction, like he's taking this from a movie, which is interesting because his visual imagination is usually so. Kirby tends to sort of free associate his own understanding of myth and history and warfare and things like he can draw on, whereas this seems like it's almost like it's a borrowed image, if you know what I mean. Like it's something he's taken from another source. In this case, cheesy fantasy films from Hollywood.
So meanwhile, some deviants are in. It's that same kind of ship we saw, although now it looks purple and it's in the water.
Purple, yeah.
So I guess it's kind of a multi-purpose vehicle. It can fly, it can swim.
It's the tips of its horns are still red. They're just above the water. So he's depicting
the water.
It's a duller color beneath the water. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the background you can see Manhattan on fire, just huge flames.
Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see.
And they've put Icarus into this capsule. He still has that brain mine stuck to his forehead. And they shoot this capsule out into the sea, and it settles on the bottom. But Ajax and his guys are watching this on a oddly shaped screen. Never seen this a video screen that shape. What even is that shape? So they could easily rescue him with a force beam, they say, but Ajax says, "I'll let him stew a little. We'll raise him when I'm ready to give the order."
Again, it sort of complicates the morality of these characters. You know, the deviants are doing evil things, have done evil things, but also are completely outmatched by the Celestials, and will probably destroy the Earth before they themselves are destroyed out of spite. The Eternals exist in this state of constant resurrection, or constant, they don't really think about time the same way we think about time. So Icarus being left to stew for however long at the bottom of the ocean, Ajax is like, yeah, that's fine. He doesn't feel any immediate concern for him because he's an Eternal. He's fine.
Yeah.
We'll get to him. Which is, inhuman. He's not. It's a moment that's meant to illustrate just how different from us they are. They are removed from common feeling.
And Dr. Damien's been studying these Inca tablets that tell about the alliance of the space gods with the Inca people, and he's freaking out about how amazing it is. And Ajax tells him that the deviants are attacking New York, but don't worry about Margot. She's safe for the present. So then we get another look at Erisham outside. Is there any other, this is about the end of the issue, are there any other important points in these last few pages?
I mean, the conversation between Ajax and the Doctor is significant, because there is this whole conversation about World War and Holocaust, and those are the terms they use. And I feel it's very chilling, actually, the fact that, again, Ajax has just no empathy whatsoever for what's being discussed. It's just you're all going to die horribly, and that's when we activate. That's when we do what we're meant to do. And the Doctor's saying, "But my daughters, Margot's out there. I need to help." Completely divorced from any concern for people. It's just interesting. Seeing this depiction of, and these are the good guys.
And then the question Ajax raises is, what will the humans do when they see Erisham? Humans don't know about this going on yet. They just know that New York is under attack. Yeah. Manhattan's basically toast at this point. Yeah. But Spider-Man's fine, don't worry.
He's okay.
This would be about the time of the hairy drug issues, and maybe that's a little bit earlier.
Well, you'd have to be on drugs. I'm seeing some freaky stuff outside, man. The design of the Celestials is just incredible. It's just, they look so amazing. Erisham, the sort of, we don't get to have the 2-page conclusion to this issue. It's just on one page. He even feels constrained by it. He's such a massive figure. But just the concept of just how, inexplicably huge these creatures are, it's really interesting. As I said, it's the one thing that really struck me as being quite powerful about these issues.
And it says at the end, next, you won't believe it, even when you see it. Olympia! 2 exclamation points.
So this is Cersei's phone call. Cersei's Zoom.
Right. The Eternals is published by Marvel. Thanks to our patrons for supporting Deconstructing Comics and our other podcasts. To join them, go to patreon.com/deconcomics. At deconstructingcomics.com, you can connect to us on X, Facebook, or YouTube. Follow the link to shop at Amazon to support the show, and find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode on our site or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. And now you can also send us a voicemail. Find the Leave a Voicemail link on the left sidebar of our site. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Comics can be a way to tell many different kinds of stories. Some are very personal, even if they also contain fantastical elements. Pidge's Infinite Wheat Paste series fits into this category. Avery Hill has just published a collection of this Ignatz Award-nominated series, and next week Pidge will be here talking to Emmet about what went into creating it. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.